Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first Wednesday talk. Mill Valley Historical Society is so pleased to put these on monthly, and every now and then it actually is on the first Wednesday, so we're very excited about that part of it. My name is Charlie Vogelheim. I am an alleged millbilly, having been born here, and this reason for that I would explain is that I grew up knowing that Tamalpais stood for the sleeping maiden, and when you see that, you know that that was an ancient Miwok story. Now, I recently did I'm a former board member of the Mill Valley Historic Society, put together a historic bike ride this past weekend. You were on it, a couple other people on the ride. It was very successful, so something we hope to continue. And what we will have, of course, coming up on the 25th is our 46th annual Walk of History, the From Ranch to Town, 1889 to 1910. Sunday, May 25th, you'll see small flyers like this. It's an annual event that we celebrate on the last weekend of May, because as we all know, that's when the original auction was in 1890, the last weekend in May. It looks really great. I've got the map here. We're getting ready. We're already practicing. So, in getting ready for the bike ride, the historic bike ride, I thought I'd just look up Mill Valley and Wikipedia just to see what they had to say about all of us. Mill Valley, located on the western and northern shores of Richardson Bay. Beyond the flat coastal areas and marshland, it occupies a narrow wooded canyons, mostly of second-growth redwoods, on the southeastern slopes of Mount Tamalpais. And I thought to myself, Tamalpais, gosh, what a beautiful word. And I remembered the history that I brought up with. And so I looked up where and how the name was, and it said there's various different folk etymologies that exist, but they're unsubstantiated. One holds that it was Spanish for Tamil, and Pais, meaning Tamil country, Tamil being the name that the Spanish missionaries gave the Coast Miwoks. Another holds that the name is a Coast Miwok word for sleeping maiden, taken from the legend of Sleeping Maiden. Unsubstantiated, not true. I'm heartbroken. I'm going, boy, right? Let's hear a big boo-hoo out there. Yeah, thank you. So the name Mount Tamalpais, apparently, and you guys can all correct me if you want to argue the point, but first recorded in 1845, originates from the Coast Miwok language, spoken by, of course, the indigenous Coast Miwoks. Tamalpais, Tamil meaning bay or coast, and Pais meaning hill or mountain in their words. So it essentially was the mountain near the coast, or the coastal mountain. So I just thought that was fantastic. Anyway, I digress because we're certainly not here to talk about the mountain. But further exploring, Expedia says in the 94941 area code also includes the following adjacent unincorporated communities: El Monte Alto, Strawberry, and Tamalpais Valley. So let's talk about Tamalpais Valley because we have the same last name as Mill Valley. You never noticed that, did you? The history of Tam Valley in the 20th century, and who better to talk about it than Lissa, right over there. Lissa McKee is a historian who has lived in the Mill Valley area for 37 years, Tam Valley resident since 1991. She has worked on environmental planner and public historian for 45 years, quote, a historic resource planner for the state of California. Some of her past projects include cultural resource surveys, National Register of Historic Places nominations, interpretive reports, ethnic community histories for a variety of agencies, including California State Park, Sacramento History Museum, National Park Service, and the California Department of Transportation. Upon her retirement, she expanded her study of local history. Fifth-generation Californian, former board member of our beloved Mill Valley Historical Society, and additionally the Sacramento County Historical Society, the Northern California chapter of the Society of Architectural Historians. She continues to be fascinated by the legacy and land use history and issues that face us to the present. Who better to talk about the history of Tam Valley in the 20th century? Please welcome Lissa McKee.
He's gone and done it and raised it again. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Now, I learned from giving this talk in Tam Valley a couple months ago.
Would you like this?
Oh, God, you're wonderful.
Okay. I'm going to just bring it over to you.
Break it. That's
Okay.
perfect.
Is this good?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Okay. And just wave if I'm, you can't hear me, because I tend to move my head around like that. Like that? Okay, okay. Anyway, thank you for coming. This talk was really an outgrowth of my interest in the more exotic, older history in Tam Valley. And I spent sort of my spare time after I moved to Tam Valley in 1990, married a local boy. I spent my spare time sort of starting in the history room here, finding old maps and so forth, pulling together the story of the 19th century, because it was very different than obviously the way we live now. And I sort of wrapped that up and did a little self-published book finally last year and gave a copy here and a copy to the elementary school. Not something I was selling or anything like that. But it's people that I was working with, a friend of mine who should be in the audience, Olivia Jacobs and so forth, who's the president of the Tamalpais Valley Improvement Club, they sort of pushed me to sort of carry the research into the 20th century. So that's sort of where this went. So just to be quick, again, see, this is where the mic becomes an issue. Tamalpais Valley was a part of Samuel Throckmorton's holdings, and for most of the 19th century, of course, the people who actually occupied Tam Valley were tenants, and that's why it was sort of intriguing for me to try and pull together that story, because you didn't have the land records that revealed who they were and so forth. So we have a few pictures here just to touch on the 19th century, obviously, Throckmorton. But these are some of the people who actually lived in Tam Valley. If anybody's looked at the 1870 map, the county map, in Tam Valley there's a little dot and the words Hoppies. And that was what first pulled me into researching Tam Valley. Who was Hoppy? Well, actually, research in old census records and other sources, and many years later, actually finding a family tree in Ancestry, Heinrich Hoppy and his wife were tenants there in 1870. And they moved on within a decade up to Sonoma County because they couldn't buy the land. As anybody who's researched Throckmorton's holdings, he held on to everything until he died. What was it, 1884? But there were other people who moved in. Now, there's a peculiar aspect to Tam Valley history that I'm going to gloss over here. But that, you know where Tennessee Valley Road is? Well, actually, Tam Valley was more influenced by Sausalito than Mill Valley, even into the end of the century, because the Sausalito Landed Ferry Company owned land to the middle of Tennessee Valley Road. So there was one family that was able to buy land, and that was the Seamus family. And their descendants live in the area to this day. Seamus had a daughter who married a Pimentel, and then a daughter who married a Silva, and Dorothy Silva, and then her daughter, Kathy Kirkland, could tell you stories that go back generations in the Tam Valley area. So that's a family photograph. That's the barn they rented from someone who owned property across the street when it finally went up for sale. This is someone who actually, a Portuguese, Azorian Portuguese, who became an important businessman in Sausalito. Anyway, that's just touching on the 19th century. But what happened is that the area started to grow. The southern Marin started to grow. I'm going to sit for a moment. I hurt my back a few years ago. Started to grow as population, of course, spread in the early 20th century. And what spurred that in southern Marin, as most people know, was the conversion of the North Shore Railroad to an interurban line, the Northwestern Pacific Railroad. And that brought people up and down Marin who were working in San Francisco or or whatever. But it also inspired a lot of real estate developers. Now, at that time, there were rail stops that would theoretically enable people to move to Tam Valley if the land was developed. A rail stop, obviously, up near what is Almonte now, and of course down at Manzanita, sorry. Anyway, this is what the valley looked like. And one of the best tools for understanding land use in this transition period is the Tamalpais Land and Water Company map number 3. Most of you may be familiar with the one for Mill Valley, but the company did a number of development maps hoping to sell off the property. Let's see. There we are. So that's Tam Valley. And this is a close-up. And so at that point, these dairy ranchers that had been living there, you can tell where they were putting in fields for hay for their cows. And so I'm a big fan of maps. Now, I'm going to back up just for a moment. One of the problems, though, for any ambitions to develop Tam Valley is you really couldn't see Tam Valley or easily get to Tam Valley or the buildable land from the rail stops because you had this marsh down in the lower portions of the valley. And so nothing really happened till around 1906 in Tam Valley, but someone in the audience who's from the Almonte area asked me about the history of Almonte. Well, because the rail stop was right there, the rail stop, where the lines converged into Mill Valley or going north, the Northwestern Pacific Realty Company subdivided or had ambitions to develop Marin Heights, part of which became Almonte later in 1902. So you start seeing where these rail stops are, the potential for development. And so this is a wonderful map. Also, I think it was full of sort of fantastical ideas. I noticed the boat club down here. And I guess the Silva Island was called Barnett Island in those days. Anyway, I just wanted to point out that if the property was close to a rail stop, it had much better potential for development. And things languished sort of for a while over in Tam Valley. But finally, a couple of realtors from San Francisco bought some bottom land and laid it out and promoted it as Tamalpais Valley. I should point out that Tamalpais Valley was called Coyote Hollow or Coyote Valley up until that point, for the creek, I guess. Anyway, I love this map because, again, like the map of Marin Heights, they too had sort of ambitions, unrealized ambitions for Tam Valley. Again, it seems quite reasonable because people were very dependent. Not everybody had a car in 1906. Most people didn't. And so here was this idea that not only were they going to lay out this neighborhood in the bottomlands just up from the marsh, but they were going to have a rail line taking off from the main line and going over to the coast, which of course never happened. So this happens about 1906. And this is also the subdivision map for that. So it's the same orientation. And these are the flatlands and these are the hills. Now, not much happens for a number of years. A few people move in, but again, it's not easy to get to. People don't have access, really. And at the edge of all this, this property that's been developed or proposed for development, they hire a sort of a caretaker. And so the first family that moves in during this period is the Newhouse family. Again, you see the theme that most of the people that are moving into this area. This is not like Mill Valley where you have generally people who are financially better off moving in. These are often immigrants who are looking for just a foothold in this country. And Rosa and all of a sudden I'm forgetting his name, but anyway, the Newhouse family moves in. What's really wonderful is their daughter kept an album of photographs, and so I've used that for research. For another story about this California National Guard that was based there for a while in the teens before they were called up for the First World War. Again, because nobody was really moving into the property at first. This was, of course, the one stop, and this was the other stop. This is the Manzanita stop. What did you say? It's not. No, it's not. It's not flooded. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Yeah. So I actually hurt my back a few years ago, and I go to Avexia, the club, the exercise club, and that's basically where Avexia is. Yeah. So what happens though is, and this is when things really start to change, is after the First World War, there's this sort of burst of development and I guess an energy for people to actually buy a home and settle down. And so at sort of the back of the valley, a number of smaller developments and subdivision maps start occurring. And there's like 5 of them in a 3-year period. And so this is Little City Farms, which is such a cute little name. And this is one of the houses from that area. You can sort of tell the houses from this period because they have what's called a hip roof right here. And here's another one from that period. And so there's like Little City Farms 1 and 2 and so forth. And there's Garden Valley Park. And here's an assessment map from 1925, which is really great because it shows you the various subdivisions. Sort of a little bit of haphazard development, but over about a 15, 20-year period, the area starts to fill up with homes. These aren't tract houses. Everybody's building their own home, and they're pretty modest. So here we have, again, Little City Farms. This is the bottomland that was the first development. And then again, this is for the person in the audience who's from Almonte. You have Marin Heights over here, which was renamed eventually Almonte. And you have here a few of the old ranchers. After Throckmorton died, the land, the rural lands came onto the market about 1893. And so here you have some of the old Portuguese ranchers finally getting a hold of the land that they've been working for 20, 30 years. Now here's a view from a little bit later, but you can see how Tam Valley's starting to build up, but rather sparsely. Again, it's not really near anything. You've got to go into Sausalito. The kids have to hike over the hill to go to high school. And the street, if you recall the map a few slides ago that says Main Street, that really never developed. That was just an illusion that it would be a downtown in Tam Valley. And so eventually it got renamed as Laurel. Now, one of the first families besides the Newhouses were the Kennys. Mr. Kenny was born in Ireland, and Mrs. Kenny from the East Coast, and I really like the Kenny story. Someone interviewed her. This was another bit of information I got from the library here, which is so wonderful. A little interview that was done with Mrs. Kenny. And they lived here. And it's the story I've gotten from the locals is that they donated the land next door that became the community church. And it was the community church until about, 15 years ago or so? And it was finally sold to private owners. Now, not only did they not really have local services, but they also, what were you going to do socially? And so I came across this, that down at Manzanita, which had been a watering hole since about the late 1870s. There were dances that were held down there, where the fireside is now. And so that was one bit of social life, but almost immediately after that burst of development in 1920, a number of community people got organized as the Tamalpais Valley Improvement Club. And that's something that really interested me, is what does an unincorporated area do in order to sort of take care of itself? Well, people organize and they try and address issues. And they held dances, of course, often for fundraising. But another thing they did was they built a little community hall in Maple. This is a much later photograph of the hall right before it was torn down when the flood control was doing some work. But they also campaigned with the county to fix the bridges. If you've gone out Highway 1, you know that it parallels Coyote Creek all the way. And so in the teens and the 20s and the 30s, in order to get to the homes, you had to cross bridges for every single street that you passed. And the bridges wouldn't be maintained, and so the Tamalpais Valley Improvement Club would put some pressure on the county right there. And they got organized around fire protection because if you look through old newspapers, it was rather common for these little wooden houses to catch fire, because of just the way people lived with lamps and near open space or near the whatever risks there were. Anyway, it was really rather tragic that occasionally there were this loss of someone's little home. And so the community organized around developing a volunteer fire department, which I think had to last, I'll touch on it a little bit later, but they had to serve as the only fire department for decades. Anyway, they also raised money for ambulance funds. And here's the picture of the fire protection. So the TVIC Hall also served as a place to store, and Olivia could correct me if I'm wrong, where they kept the fire truck that they managed to acquire. So these are all volunteer firemen. And this, just to touch on this, years later, they actually moved to a better location when they got forced out by the flood control project. And then eventually in 1977 to the firehouse that they have now. Now, there was some local business, but it really wasn't local serving. The highway to the north, what we think of as Highway 101, of course, didn't go over Richardson Bay at that point. It wound its way into Tam Junction and then up north. And so that area attracted some business opportunities. And so by about 1915, 1917, there was a little gas station there. And I learned about this years ago because one of the Portuguese dairymen up on the hill working for the Diaz Ranch, which was right there at the top of Panoramic, he and a brother-in-law started a little business down here. And so this is Oliveira and Alvarez. Well, actually, I'll show you that. It was replaced by that. Dan Alvarez and his partner eventually replaced the building with this one. And this was built in the early 30s. Yes, the surf shop. Exactly, it's the surf shop. But what's really kind of charming about the other one is is that they had a little cafe in there too, and they served sort of Portuguese type food with shellfish and so forth. That's what I was told by a descendant. Now, I love this aerial because it shows you just how separate the residential area is from the road north, the road that was moving people and traffic north or to Mill Valley. This was all marsh. The marsh actually extended seasonally all the way up to here, but this was definitely marsh, and this is where my neighborhood is now. Anyway. So here's the road north before the Richardson Bay Bridge, and here's where a fellow named Dolan buys the property around 1919. So you've got the gas station over here, but you have Dolan buying property to have basically construction material, which seems like a pretty practical kind of business to have because people are building houses up in Tam Valley and over in Mill Valley and so forth. And Dolan does pretty well there for a number of years. Here's a state highway map. I worked for Caltrans, so whenever I saw a useful map, I'd get a copy of it, of course. And so this is Dolan's operation. This is the gas station, and a couple of other little businesses that aren't there anymore. Dolan did really well until, of course, the Depression. And at that point, he's trying to sell his property, which is really sort of sad. Now, as it languishes during the Depression, I'm sort of jumping ahead here, it becomes sort of an eyesore for the Tam Valley Improvement Club and the locals. And so the Tamalpais Valley Improvement Club lobbies, I think Greyhound, I think it is, the Greyhound line, which there was a bus line that went to the coast through Tam Valley in the 20th century, in the mid-20th century. And they lobbied them to change the name of the corner there from Dolan's Corners, which was what the area was called, to Tamalpais Junction, which I guess, in retrospect is a little more elegant. And they wanted to basically, and this really was less a criticism of the condition of the construction site or the lumber company that Dolan had, and another story, which is that during the Second World War, a lot of the shipyard workers liked to come over to the corner, Dolan's Corners, and drink at a place called the Pastime, which apparently the locals referred to as the Bucket of Blood. So really it had to do with those kind of shenanigans that had the Tam Valley Improvement Club trying to get the name of the area changed just to sort of, elevate the reputation of Tam Valley. Yeah. Yeah, it was only a memory of its lusty, rowdy reputation. There was a couple other businesses down there. I love this, Mayor Tomatoes. It was a little cafe that was no longer, obviously, down at the junction. And but he was really cool. He kept a little column in the Mill Valley Record about goings on. So you had a little bit of news about Tam Valley in the Record. And that's always really wonderful. I want to point out, this is my little advertisement issue or whatever. The California Digital Newspaper Collection, which has been invaluable in doing research on these sort of hinterland kind of places, is at great risk of losing its funding. And for those of you who like to do research in the CDNC, it may not be available. There's references, well, they don't have a paywall, and which means that it's been free up until now. So I just wanted to point that out. I'm very... Yeah, UC Riverside and Brian Geiger, I think that's how he pronounces his name, who manages it. He's been sending out notices to people who use it a lot. And apparently they've been defunded by the state. And the story is the reason why the state's defunded them, it has to do with the cuts at the federal level to the, Museum and Archives grants. So I've been really fortunate. I'm old enough to remember sitting in front of the microfilm reader back in graduate school, losing my eyesight for hours to get 2 or 3 little bits of information. And now I can sit on the couch and do a query for Mayor Tomatoes or Tamalpais Valley Improvement Club or whatever. So I just wanted to throw it out there that if you're really interested in local history, you can get on the CDNC right now, because we don't know if it's going to survive, because UC Riverside needs, they're losing $300,000 in their funding. And it's really sad. Anyway, whoops, sorry. Okay, here's another business in Tam Valley. That is an early one. In fact, I get a little confused. It was called Myers Cleaners at one point, and Myers was someone who married Evelyn Newhouse, the daughter. So these are all little local stories, but again, that's what makes a community. And so this is a picture of Tamalpais French Cleaners, which everybody thinks of now as, I don't know what. And we used to call it for years the Rug House, but now it's called the Junction. Anyway, that's a picture of it from 1950. And this is a backup. Again, these are highway photos I got my hands on. So this is driving into the Junction about 1950. And this is, I suspect, after a high tide. There was a couple of little groceries that were established near where that main street was supposed to develop. But again, you've got to have a lot of customers in order for a business area to develop, and that just didn't happen for decades. But this is where the 7-Eleven is now, but it was a little local store. Now we're getting to the really dynamic period, which is kind of tricky to balance all the things that are happening at the same time. Even though Tam Valley was a very slow area to develop, it was, and they had to sort of struggle to get the roads and electric lights and so forth. It was relatively pastoral for a long time. And then after the Second World War, all that enthusiasm that resulted from our successes of, bringing in airfields on some Pacific island that was so important as part of the effort to win the Second World War, that carries over into enthusiasm for building highways and building housing tracts so that the soldiers can come home and buy houses and so forth. And what happens, though, by this point is the area that they're looking at is the marginal lands, like the marshlands. So this is my neighborhood, 1951. This is Flamingo Road. You know where the grocery store is, the Good Earth now? Good Earth is right there. And this is a year later when the houses, they're building the houses. And the development at the bottom end of the valley where I live was called Crest, Marin, not Birdland. And of course, when my husband and I bought it, we thought it would be a starter home. And of course, we're lucky to have the house still. I love these aerials, and they can show you what is rapidly happening down at the junction, because now you're getting all the customers. And so the junction is starting to develop, the commercial area. You still have the surf shop building, and the pastime is still there a little bit. Yeah. Well, there's a rumor going around that the whole area has settled. No, that was the first bridge. That's not the current bridge. No, really. I have photographs. So there was a bridge built in 1950 to access this new development, and it's a level bridge. You can see again, it's level. I actually called it the county to find out when it was replaced. And was it what? I sent that to you, Olivia. I think it was like the 70s, right? Yeah. Now, I'm not saying there hasn't been settlement. That's why we have two sump pumps in our backyard. But anyway, this is the neighborhood. Now, the way the marshland was developed is 1948-49. K Park Units 1 and 2 were built, and that's the neighborhood with Ross and so forth, if some of you are from that neighborhood. And then 1952-53, the Crest Marin, technically subdivision map K Park Units 3 and 4, I think, was built here. And immediately, of course, that created another issue, is the snowball effect of development. And I wanted to point this out. I was asked to throw in a few things from Mill Valley proper so you can see the context here. Not only was the subdivisions I've just referred to, they were built in former marshlands, but this is Mill Valley, and this is a Coast and Geodetic Survey map from the 19th century. And the high school is about here, okay? And this is where all the housing was built also in the 1950s. See? I'm going to go back and forth in case. So we have here, and we have here. Okay? And what happens, and I'm not an expert in hydrology. I'm sure there's people in the audience who are much smarter than me. But coincidentally, you have some really wet years in the early 1950s. There's floods in various places in California, in the Central Valley where I grew up, and so forth. And so you start having flooding issues. But just to do a little aside here, you also have this population growth. Now, I wanted to look for a little context on this, and as early as 1946, there was a school bond that was pushed for this area because everybody expected to have this need for more schoolrooms. And remember, in the Second World War, a lot of that was really held up. And so to backtrack here, sorry. There was a little school before that, in the early 40s, in Tam Valley, a private school that specialized actually in helping kids who'd had a hard time in the regular schools. Though, frankly, a lot of the reasons why they were having a hard time in the regular schools is because the schools were overcrowded. Over in Mill Valley, where you have, again, more of an infrastructure, a bureaucratic infrastructure for getting things done, you have the Alto School, constructed by, I think it was 1948. So they go to school first. Again, Alto is an area that was part of it marshy and so forth. And here's another picture of Alto School. So over in Tam Valley, they're lobbying also for a school. I love this story. Sometimes for an unincorporated area, it takes the community a long time to get what they need. But the people in Tam Valley have always been very feisty. And when the word came down that Strawberry was going to get a school first, they hired a lawyer. So Tam Valley got the school first. And there you have the start. Whoops, sorry. I'm going in the wrong direction. Here you have the start of the school. And it was just 4 classrooms, but they got the school first, and then the following year, Strawberry got a school. And then, of course, they expanded the schools over the subsequent years. While I was doing some research, Olivia and I actually went over to Tam Valley School to talk to them about the school history, and they had an album of clippings going all the way back to the beginning. And so we turned our little research effort into an opportunity to sort of do something back for the school. And Olivia, again, as president of the TVIC, scanned the whole collection for the school so they would have a copy. So if the album went missing, they would have it. And so here's just some subsequent, the school evolving over the years. So one of the other consequences, of course, of all this growth was an effect on the sanitation system. Now, up until this point, everybody in Tam Valley had a septic system. When they built Cake Parks Unit 1 and 2, they were hooked up to a sewer system. Mill Valley had had a sewer system in many places, long before that. And it was a mandate that Cake Parks Unit 3 and 4, or Crest, Marin, also have a sewer system. But therein lies one of the challenges. The people who have septic are saying, well, we don't want to be assessed because I've already got my septic system. So the short version of the story is it took about 9 years for them to get a sewer system in Tam Valley because they, again, absent a city council or anything like that, you had the Tam Valley Improvement Club and others had to hold a series of meetings to get everybody on board. Now, so I wanted to point this out because these things do have sort of I don't mean to make a pun because it's really rude, but a spillover to other issues. This is happening in the 1950s when there's a huge polio epidemic. And one of the clippings I have in here, this one, it's the health experts are saying that a lot of the problem had to do with contamination in the creek system. And so, again, the sanitary system is really important in this period. So things that we take for granted now. And eventually, they dedicate the new sewers and so forth. Here's the other spillover. Again, I'm going to use a lot of puns. The other issue is flooding. As soon as they started to build Cake Parks Unit 3 and 4, or Crest Marin, the people in Cake Parks Unit 1 and 2 start complaining because they're starting to get flooding because you have basically earth moving going on, fill and other activities downstream, so to speak. And this coincides again with those early 1950s floods that are happening all over California. This is in Tam Junction, where the Martin Brothers is. And in fact, there's newspaper clippings I've got maybe in here or not, that the Martin Brothers, who were local boys, had grown up there and started a business when they came back from the Second World War. They were out there with their construction equipment pushing cars off of the highway because people just would get stalled and the highway was blocked. And of course, this is over in Mill Valley, same period, 52, 53. Well, yeah, and again in 55. And this is over in Tam Valley, I believe. And again, Pine Street in Tam Valley. That's why my husband and I have two sump pumps. Now, this was actually one of the most complicated challenges for Tam Valley because, of course, the people uphill, weren't as worried about the flooding. And in an unincorporated area, what are you going to do other than try and build or create an assessment district? And the short version of the story is it took 15 years to get this issue addressed. Not that it's ever fully addressed, as we know, with climate change and so forth. Now, there were various programs coming down from the feds in this period because the flooding was happening all over California. But in order to access those funds, you have to create an assessment district. And so then you have to get everybody in the community on board. And so it just dragged on for the longest time. This is 1962. Finally, about 1964, the Corps of Engineers comes in and they start channelizing the creek, which of course now in retrospect has its own problems. But they channelized the creek up valley, and they straightened out the creek down valley. It winds its way through Crest, Marin, and this is right before, sorry, I'm looking for the other picture, which now seems to have slipped away. Anyway, I'm sorry about that. They straightened it from the bridge, the Highway 1 bridge, out to the marsh. So the current creek goes like this, out to the marsh. And having worked for 30 plus years with environmental planners, a little knowledge has sort of come my way about the downside of straightening a reach of a water system. But anyway, that's the way they were handling things in 1964. Now they have these various districts and sump pumps set up. It was interesting trying to get information on this subject from Mill Valley proper because a lot of work now seems to be done by contractors and they don't have the corporate memory. When I would call and say, well, when was the sump pump in that particular neighborhood built, and nobody would know. But I was able to get at least, as I mentioned earlier, the dates for the Coyote Creek Bridge on Flamingo and so forth. And of course, the Tamalpais Sanitary District evolved into the Tamalpais Valley Community Service District. And they're sort of our local government that people go to even if they aren't necessarily responsible for the flood pumps. Everybody calls them up when there is a flood issue. So this is basically the Tamalpais Valley now. And the marsh, of course, has been reduced from being all the way up here and down to there. But we still have flooding issues. This is 1982. That's like 2 houses from ours. Anyway, simultaneously, you do have a growth of local businesses, which I think is really nice. I can't believe we were so lucky to get the good earth. The downside, of course, is you get all the tourists going there, and if you go there in the middle of the day, you can't get a parking spot. But so these are the 1950s businesses: the Richfield Station, Fern and Al. That's one of the grocery stores. This is the gas station on the corner, and of course Dan's Liquors, which was Dan Alvarez, who had the little older building before that. These are some of the businesses there in the 1950s and 60s. And this is one of my favorites. I love these things. So I guess it's a bit of marketing by the locals, and everybody probably had to chip in to get this map made, but it even has the pastime on it still. And other little businesses that were there. And so finally, by the 1950s, you've got local serving businesses, thank God. And there's Martin Brothers. Now, sadly, the Martin family just sold the business to someone else, so it's not run by the Martins. Yeah, because Bert passed away, and I think his wife, that story I was told that they sold it. Now, you think most of the local challenges, the challenges for a community are local, but then in the 1950s, you have all these external challenges, and this one's a little bit harder to tweak out the relationship between these various challenges, but they're pretty fascinating. A group called the Redwood Empire Association, which in a sense reflected the sort of pro-growth, tourism boosterism that is very early 1950s. They start lobbying the State Highway Commission to reroute Highway 1. And they start around 1953. And they have a fair amount of influence. And they've got certain state legislators on their side. And so these are some of, I'm sorry the map isn't really great, but it shows various alternatives. And one would go right through the heart of Tam Valley, a 4-lane highway. The other alternatives would go up and over the headlands and then along the coast. Now here's a close-up. So these are various alternatives that were being promoted. And this was, mind you, in the years before environmental regulations where you had to study the effects of these alternatives. But you still have sort of political response, and the people in Tam Valley went nuts. There's newspaper articles about, a meeting would be held and they'd all come out and protest. They certainly didn't want their houses all ripped out for a 4-lane highway. And this is another map of one of the proposals. Apparently, one of the strongest alternatives was, when you think of all the traffic, it would have come into Tam Junction and out Tennessee Valley Road, and then up over the hill. And you have a fair amount of support on this from, again, pro-growth people, generally not people from Mill Valley or Tam Valley, for a number of years. But this happens to occur, wait, I'm going to jump past. This happens to occur at the same time that Gulf Oil gets their hands on a bunch of ranch land out in the headlands. And a guy named, Thomas Frug, who was a developer and apparently had a lot of successful projects on the East Coast. I never understand why people think they can go somewhere they've never been and then completely change it. But he was quite enthused, and they were marketing this idea called cluster development, which again had a certain cachet in the early 1950s and so forth, that it was going to be a way of not having too much spread. You would have, again, high-rises, which got a lot of people in the county on board. And now I'm not going to go into the details of this because there's documentaries and books on this subject that provide a much more analysis of what was happening. But I was asked at the last time I gave a version of this talk, what was the relationship between the rerouting of Shoreline Highway and the Frug development, which of course he was marketing as Marincello. And marketing with a lot of political power. Vera Schultz was on his side. The whole board was on his side. In the end, the short version of the story was the city of Sausalito and a handful of lawyers, including Bob Pritzell, fought this and fought it for years, mostly pro bono. It appears from jumping between material on the Redwood Highway Association proposal and the Marincello project that Frug was hoping to have one of his main entrances to Marincello go down Tennessee Valley Road, along with all that traffic that would be rerouted to go all the way. I'm sorry, I hope I didn't flash someone with my laser pointer. All that traffic that was going to be going up the coast. And so this dragged on while people were trying to beat down the Redwood Highway Association. Some people in the Mill Valley area formed a sort of a contrary organization called the Scenic Roads Association, saying that this was a really dumb idea. And if you saw Mike Moyle's really wonderful talk last month about the building of Waldo Grade, you'd have to understand that this would be an incredibly expensive rerouting, because it would have to go leap over ridges and cross valleys all the way. One of the less renowned people who fought the Marincello project also would have been affected by the rerouting of Highway 1. And that was George Wheelwright, who was a really remarkable person. He was one of the developers, he and land of the Polaroid technology, and he bought land that became Green Gulch, and he was one of the people that sued to try and stop the Marincello project. Obviously, he didn't want his ranch lands that he donated later as Green Gulch to be ruined, but also, he from what little I've read about him, he was a person who really was committed to give back to the community. And again, to have made these changes, not just Marincello, but the rerouting of Highway 1, it would have been tearing up the countryside. Let's not even talk about habitat. And there's a picture of Bob. Luckily, by 1973, again, the cliff notes of the story is that they basically wore them down with lawsuits and got them on all kinds of shortcuts, including the way resolutions and zoning was handled. And it became, as we all know, the GGNRA. Meanwhile, the whole 1950s ethic of pro-growth and boosterism evolved, as we know, into sort of the environmental era. And I don't know now with changes to CEQA what's going to happen, but at least in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, we had area community plans where communities had an opportunity to weigh in on what changes might occur. And so I'm just going to wrap this up with how the Tamalpais Valley Improvement Club continued its work to engage the community. When the flood control came in, they took over the land where their clubhouse was. So they started a tradition that survives to this day, the Rhubarb Review, where people would get out and perform and raise money. And that's how they built the community clubhouse in Tam Valley. Over a decade or so of raising money, holding the Rhubarb Reviews. And I was briefly president in one of those newsletters I produced, trying to get the word out locally. Again, I mean, if you want to look at the big picture here, what's happening with newspapers and communication, local communication, local news is still critical. Thank you.
Questions? I have one quickly. Can you comment at all on the cemetery?
Yeah,
Go ahead and
that's in my older talk.
Oh, okay.
The Sausalito Land and Ferry Company established that cemetery, I'm trying to remember now, in the 1890s. At Fernwood, yeah. They established it, and it eventually was acquired by Fernwood, I think, in the 60s, 70s, and so forth. It was sort of neglected. Most of the people who were buried there were from Sausalito or Tam Valley. When I first moved to Tam Valley, I met a woman who was raised in a Azorean Portuguese family, and I asked her about, what she recalled and so forth, and what she learned from her parents. And one of the stories that stuck with me is her mother had told her, for God's sakes, if I die during the winter, don't bury me at Fernwood, because I'll just they'll just slide down the hill. But there's a wonderful section up there full of the early Portuguese dairy ranchers, and I've been up there a number of times. It's a really beautiful place.
Mount Tamalpais?
Yeah, and my house.
Questions? Any other questions?
I couldn't actually tell you when it was designated as a park, but it's part of the Little City Farms area, and there has been, especially Oh, thank you. Especially when the Tamalpais Community Service District sort of expanded their obligation, their mission to include parks. They did, in a sense, go in the, expand it in that way, because what was happening when various neighborhoods were being developed, and as you know, is, what we now have are sort of small areas, 3 or 4 parcels that someone wants to develop for housing or so forth. There would be a little bit of leftover land, right, Olivia? Yeah, a little bit of leftover land, and the county would say, well, we'll approve this, but you need to designate that 1/4 acre for community use. And the problem was who was going to take responsibility, because we aren't in a city. And so the Tamalpais Sanitary District eventually became a community service district with a mission to include managing parks. And they handle Eastwood Park and the tennis courts and the play structure and that sort of thing. And so I don't think there was anything industrial or some previous development there. It was the heart of the old dairy ranch. And in fact, my other talk, there's a book here in the library that I donated, and it's just a little thin thing, but I wanted to capture all those great photographs that I got my hands on. It shows how Eastwood Park was at the heart of where the California National Guard had their encampment between 1911 and 1917. What happened was the California National Guard was under sort of a requirement to sort of upgrade the kind of training that they were providing for their soldiers. And so in various places around California, either they acquired land or they leased land. And because Tam Valley the developments weren't really selling at that time in 1911, National Guard came in and rented for 7, 8 years land at the back of the valley. And so these photographs are pretty cool. I mean, so the most, extreme thing that occurred there were, various shooting ranges. And people who grew up in the valley told me that if you look around the back of the valley, sometimes you find old military-grade bullets in the trees, because the marksmen weren't very good.
Or maybe the trees grew.
Yeah.
Let's go right over here.
Hi. Oh, unfortunately,
The question was about Oakwood.
yeah, Oakwood. Okay, I do know something about Oakwood because I did a moonlighting project in around 2006. I was hired to do in my spare time, which was kind of tricky, an evaluation of some properties within the GGNRA. That's a whole nother story about how the GGNRA, when it was established, was pretty focused on its biological resources, because the Nature Conservancy and others had really campaigned to protect the land and turn it into public land with the feds. And anyway, I evaluated Miwok Ranch, or the history of Miwok Ranch, which had been the Cunha place. And the Cunhas came from the Azores, and they came in somewhere around 1870, because again, they were tenants, so it's really tricky to figure out when they arrived on that particular location. And they ran a dairy farm there for years. And eventually, as I mentioned in the talk, when the Throckmorton property, because of debt, was acquired by the San Francisco Savings and Loan in 1884 after Throckmorton died, and they had ambitions to sort of sell off large parcels, Cunha bought the parcel where the stables are, and they bought Oakwood Valley. And that leads one to conclude that they were using Oakwood Valley to grow hay and so forth. It's not really grazing land, but they probably grew hay there. It's all, the eucalyptus trees came in later. And and it was also a little bit drier. One of the things that there were some oral histories conducted by the Park Service of the people, the Lopes, who were the last people to live at Miwok Stables before the Park Service acquired it, and they said that they had a lot of problems out there with the hay mildewing and so forth. So I think that, again, I'm not a biologist, please. I think that probably Oakwood Valley, but I know it was one of the parcels that was owned by Dacunia, and then the Raposo, another Azorian Portuguese, was the one who owned Miwok Stables and Oakwood Valley when the Park Service acquired the land. It's my understanding that in the early 20th century, there were a couple of smaller farmsteads up Oakwood Valley. If you walk up there, you see kind of plants, bulb plants and things and someone told me there was a little house up there at one point. And that's about sort of the extent of what I know about Oakwood Valley. I love Oakwood Valley. I would love to get back there and hike. I fractured 9 vertebrae, so I haven't been hiking for a while. But it's a beautiful area.
We're going to do one more and then
I'm sorry.
And talk afterwards, but let's get
Is there any rumors what's going to happen to the lot that I think it used to be a gas station?
I don't know. My fantasy is that Good Earth buys it and so they can have more parking. Or leases it because they probably don't want to have to deal with the remediation there from the gas station. But I don't know where Olivia went. That's actually Olivia's expertise is
As a former waiter at Le Camembert, does anybody know what's going on at the Dipsy Cafe?
I know that John.
Is that it?
Yeah, there was a fight on who was responsible for replacing the sewers.
Oh, really? John didn't own the land? He leased it?
The owner wouldn't do it, and
Oh,
Well, we've seen that
Dipsy
ditch there
Cafe
forever.
wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
It got torn up, and it just sat there.
I know. Isn't that sad?
All right, last question.
Yeah, it's just a skinny little. It's the 19th. It's just a little thin little thing. I wanted to put everything in writing before I lost my memory, and unfortunately I used a self-publishing company called Blurb, and you can't do footnotes with Blurb. So I have sort of a narrative bibliography in there, but it was a way of pulling together the 19th century story. And yeah, it's over in the history room. I gave a copy to. Hey, if someone really wants it, I had like 3 extra copies made for $10. I'm not looking to make any money. I'd be happy to give it to you. I don't really care, because I just want to make sure the story's not lost before, again, I forget where I found. When you're working on something for 30 years, you go back on your computer and you think, doggone it, where did I get that photograph? That's like a sin for historians. You're supposed to know where stuff comes from. So I'd be happy to give you a copy. Sure.
Okay, how about a nice thank you to Lissa? Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And again, a reminder, special thanks to our beloved the cast and crew of the Mill Valley Historical Society putting this together. Don't forget the historic walk on Sunday, May 25th. There's information. You can look online, and there's also a way to log on. And our good friends here at Mill Valley Public Library for having us all here. Thank you all for being here. Thank you.